Change terrifies us not because it is painful, but because it forces us to leave behind the illusion of control.
To survive in a rapidly evolving market, an organization must constantly adapt its business strategy. A static operating model is a liability. We know companies are physically capable of this near-instant adaptation. When the COVID-19 pandemic threatened basic external survival, entire operations went remote overnight. Yet, when a company attempts a proactive internal strategic shift, like restructuring a department or deploying new software, the success rate plummets. These initiatives frequently stall and cause severe organizational damage. When these internal projects fail, it is rarely due to a lack of technical skill or financial resources. The structural planning is usually sound. The breakdown occurs in the human element. The point of failure is an inability to lead human capital through a disruptive transition. If the workforce cannot adapt, the highest-tier business strategy becomes irrelevant. Human resistance is the primary barrier to execution. For decades, management operated on a rigid, mid-century model. A CEO issued a top-down mandate, and the workforce was expected to execute it without question. That heavy-handed approach breaks down in a complex, modern enterprise, where work requires high autonomy and specialized knowledge. The core reality we have to address is that resistance to change is a universal and entirely natural human response. Leaders often misinterpret this friction as employee insubordination, or assume it indicates a simple lack of buy-in. The friction is actually biological. Resistance is an evolutionary survival mechanism, triggered the moment uncertainty creates a perceived threat. To lead a successful transition, leadership must stop trying to manage corporate culture and start treating the clinical mechanics of fear. In psychology, the severe, paralyzing fear of change is known as metathesiophobia. It describes exactly how the brain reacts to new and unfamiliar situations. To the human nervous system, a new organizational strategy is not viewed as a business opportunity. The brain interprets the unknown as a literal threat to physical safety. This triggers a cycle of catastrophic thinking. Employees automatically begin to envision worst-case scenarios regarding their job security and their daily competence. The behavioral output of this internal panic is a clinical phenomenon called cognitive avoidance. In a corporate setting, cognitive avoidance manifests as endless, repetitive rumination, sudden indecision on routine tasks, and reflexive dismissal of new initiatives. Any movement generates physical friction. A change initiative creates psychological heat, and managing the transition means keeping that heat at a tolerable level. Organizational resistance is not a conscious choice made by employees. It is a physiological response to strategic instability. We can measure and alter this response using clinical tools like schema therapy, which was designed to dismantle early maladaptive schemas and dysfunctional behavioral patterns. A recent study published in the Caspian Journal of Health Research applied this therapy to couples experiencing high levels of conflict and anxiety. This chart shows the pre-test baseline scores for the subjects. We see high initial levels of anxiety, measured at 24.13, and cognitive avoidance at 51.27, alongside a resilience score of 43.53. Following an 8-week structured intervention, the metrics shifted significantly. Anxiety dropped to 20.80, and cognitive avoidance fell to 46.67. Concurrently, resilience, defined as the ability to adapt to severe pressures and disasters, rose to 50.87. The therapy achieved this by challenging rigid cognitive schemas through experimental strategies, guiding participants through role-playing and emotional expression. Researchers measured the participants again 45 days later, and the post-test results held steady. The psychological shift was permanent. Cognitive avoidance is not an unchangeable personality trait. It is a metric that improves directly through structured psychological intervention. Leading human capital is a challenge of scale. An enterprise-wide transition is a coordinated psychological shift across thousands of individual nervous systems. Because individual change is the prerequisite for organizational change, management frameworks like the Prob ADKR model operate as large-scale versions of clinical behavioral plans. ADKR's opening phases, awareness and desire, mirror the clinical sequence of identifying a dysfunctional schema. The employee must first recognize the need for change and find a psychological anchor that validates making the move. This phase is the gateway. Without personal validation, the brain remains in a state of cognitive avoidance, regardless of how many technical directives are issued from the top. The model then moves into knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. These are the organizational terms for behavioral pattern breaking, replacing old resistant habits with new adaptive skills. Strategies that ignore this biological progression create an environment where catastrophic thinking flourishes. The result is a total breakdown between strategic intent and workforce execution. ADKAR and similar frameworks are effective specifically because they respect the biological sequence required for any animal to move from the familiar to the unknown. Successful organizations apply this sequence by building internal change networks. These distributed champions act as a therapeutic alliance within their specific business units. They deploy a strategy of going where the energy is, aligning initiatives with departments that demonstrate the highest readiness to adapt. Change management serves as the connective tissue, linking the abstract business strategy directly to physical execution. This process builds organizational resilience, allowing a company to be strengthened by the experience of disruption. Employee resistance is never malice. It is simply the physical friction generated by internal psychological movement. To execute a modern strategy, leaders must stop fighting the biology of their workforce and start engineering the systems that support it.